My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and the grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. I believe it was Oscar Wilde who once famously said that comparisons are odious. Comparisons don't help, and we know this instinctively to be true, at least on a social level, on a personal level. How often we have found ourselves comparing in our minds with those around us. And how often does that lead to critical spirit, to feelings of envy or sadness or unworthiness, jealousy, exaggerations, misunderstandings, etc., etc., etc. And yet, Jesus, we tend to compare. We tend to look around at the situations of others and measure ourselves, measure them. And we worry about what people think of us. We worry about how we're perceived. There's so many idioms that have to do with this phenomenon of comparison. Comparisons are odious. The grass is always greener on the other side. Don't judge a book by its cover. We have this insecurity, we could call it, or perhaps this pride that leads us to judge other people's intentions, to compare and contrast, to think about or to worry about what other people think. And it's true, sometimes our comparing is an expression of our own insecurity. We worry about what other people think, and we're moved more by a desire to fit in and be accepted than by our pursuit of the true and the good, of our own authenticity. In today's gospel, people ask Jesus why he and his disciples do not fast when John and his disciples do. The disciples of John and of the Pharisees were accustomed to fasting. People came to Jesus and objected. Why do the disciples of John the Baptist and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Jesus answered them, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast on that day. Well, first off, Jesus, your response is truly wonderful. It's so refreshing. You lay things out so simply and so clearly. How can the guests at a wedding fast while the groom, and we could say the bride, is still with them? Could you imagine people fasting at a wedding banquet? It would be ridiculous. It wouldn't make any sense. It's a time of celebration. Lord, it's like you're telling these people that have come to you with this question, you're saying your comparison is not apt. Don't compare because you're missing the point. The bridegroom has arrived. Fasting is currently inappropriate. Now, what was all this concern about fasting anyway? Of course, fasting is good. It's an important form of prayer. It's one of the principal forms of prayer. We could say that fasting is a prayer of the senses, in which we place our bodies on the alert so that they can be more receptive to God, to search for him and to find him. And the Jews of our Lord's time fasted. They understood this. The primary fast of the Jews was the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, one of the 7 high holy days of the law of Moses. But the Pharisees also fasted on the 2nd and 4th days of every week, and it seems that the disciples of John were doing something similar. Although this fasting wasn't part of the law of Moses, by Jesus' day, it had become an important expression of the Pharisees' meticulous devotion to the ceremonial law. You'll recall that parable of that proud Pharisee who, comparing himself to the publican, boasted about the fact that he fasted twice a week. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And it wouldn't be outrageous to assume that the disciples of John the Baptist were even more rigorous in their fasting. Many scholars believe that John the Baptist was part of the Essene movement, and the Essenes lived out in the desert. They rejected the temple culture. We know that John himself lived for a time on wild locusts and honey, not exactly gourmet food. Well, all these efforts to fast are very clear, fasting on the second and fourth day of the week, etc. But then you, Jesus, come along, Jesus of Nazareth, and you don't seem to live these observances. You attend weddings, you go to parties, you eat in people's homes. And so the comparisons start to bubble up. People start to compare. And the Pharisees become uptight about this. In fact, they call you, Jesus, a glutton and a drunkard, while John the Baptist they call a demon. You make a point of this. You say, for John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard. Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. It's like you can't win with these comparisons. The Pharisees are upset with John the Baptist, for fasting too much, and with Jesus for not fasting enough. You can't win. But wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Divine wisdom will indicate what is truly important. And so, Jesus, when they come to you with this question, you're trying to show them what is essential. It would seem that the Pharisees are overly focused on the rules of religion than on what those rules express and mean. To fast is essentially to unite yourself to God, to seek union with him through self-denial. But the apostles of Jesus, unlike the disciples of John or the Pharisees, they were already living with the Lord. The wedding feast of the Messiah had begun for them. This insecurity of the Pharisees, this uptightness, this concern, these comparisons, it reminded me a little bit of the current phenomenon of FOMO, F-O-M-O, the fear of missing out, which is believing that someone else is doing something better than you are, and therefore you are missing out. It's social angst, heightened by social media, which portrays a false image of life. And while the mindset has always been present in every generation, this tendency to compare, there's a growing trend of keeping our options open, waiting for something better, this fear of missing out. But it's not helping us live our lives any better, and it's keeping us away from what is essential. Think about these scenes you see frequently. Maybe you do some of these things yourself. The first scene, a young couple on a date at a restaurant. And they don't engage hardly at all in conversation, rarely make eye contact, and stare at their phones for most of the dinner. It's like they're afraid that the options online on their phones are better than what is in front of them. Or, I don't know, you ask someone if they want to go on Friday night to watch a movie or to go to the bar, and they get flaky about an answer. They might say something like, well, text me before you leave and I'll let you know if I can go. Or that scene of the relative who's been dating their significant other for 10 years, but has no plans to get married because they want to keep their options open. This is something we see repeatedly in our culture. And the culture watchers know this is happening, and they play on our vulnerability by overwhelming us with more choices, more possibilities. Jesus, help us not to spend our lives comparing and worrying how we come off, whether so-and-so's situation is better than our own, whether we're missing out. The important thing is to be with you, and that is within reach of everyone, each one of us. And that's why we do these 10 minutes with Jesus. As long as we're facing God and centered on his opinion, his love for us, then we can free ourselves from the chains of FOMO, of comparisons, of getting lost in the little rules, missing the forest for the trees. We ask Our Lady to help us to understand things properly and to know how to recognize you, Jesus, each day so as to celebrate your wedding feast. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations that you've communicated to me in this meditation. I ask your help in putting them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.